Okay, we are back. I am very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show best-selling author Margie Worrell. She wrote a book called Stop Playing Safe. That's her most recent book. She is an executive coach. She's on the news all the time. She's worked with companies like Best Buy and British Telecom and even NASA. Margie, real pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here, Doug.
So you tell people to stop playing safe. My mother taught me always to play it safe. And you are a mother, so what's the difference between the two of you?
Yeah, look, I mean, as a mother, of course, we don't want our kids to take foolish risks. We don't want them to be hurt and find themselves in situations where, bad things can happen to them. But I think we are very conditioned to play safe, and we're naturally wired to be risk averse. However, in the big scheme of life, there is nothing worthwhile that can be achieved without taking a risk. And it's my very passionate belief, and certainly my experience working with a lot of people and organisations, that it's people's reticence to take risk. Their unwillingness to lay themselves on the line that ultimately can hold them back in the most profound ways, professionally and personally.
Okay, so let's take that into my world. My day job is that I'm a financial advisor. I do the radio gig once a week, and I get to speak to interesting people like you. But day to day, I'm talking to clients about how to invest their money and financial planning. And I feel it's my responsibility to tell them to be careful, because people love taking risks. They get excited about it. But then, frankly and statistically, people who take risks with their own investments usually underperform the markets significantly. How do you see the two ideas going together?
Yeah, look, obviously when it comes to money, it's very emotional. And when it comes to assessing risk, what we know is that people aren't always very accurate in how they judge risk. And when there's a lot of emotion involved, particularly when it's something like making a quick dollar, this is the get rich quick thing. And obviously everyone wants to find some way to make a lot of money in a minimal amount of time. But we aren't always very good at assessing risk accurately. And so it's really important to make sure you do run the numbers, that you do your due diligence, and that you don't let emotions run the show, whether it's the emotion of greed and trying to, get something extra for nothing, or it's that emotion of fear of avoiding putting ourselves in situations where we could ultimately, we could actually benefit.
Mm-hmm. We actually spoke on the Goldstein on Gelt show with Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics, and this was a big topic of what he discussed here on the show, and he pointed out that the fear and greed which you are referring to is that his studies show that people tend simply to act much more based on fear than on greed, meaning if there's two choices, they'll prefer to run away even if there's a possibility to make money. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel would have shared this with you. Losses loom larger than gains. So we tend to be far more focused on what we have to lose, i.e. that's that fear emotion. I'm afraid of what I might lose here, than on what we have to gain, which can obviously, sometimes be greed, but other times it's really just about making a change in our lives and doing something that would ultimately really serve us. So absolutely, I believe that fear is the most potent emotion, and it's the one that can ultimately undermine our decisions and our actions in the biggest way. So, for anyone that I'm working with in my work, whether it's with people who are senior leaders in organisations or people who are starting out with an entrepreneurial venture, is get really clear about what is it that you really want. What's the vision that excites you? What is it you want to achieve? Then, look at what is it you need to do to get into action, to creating it. And when it comes, there's always going to be risk involved. So you have to assess the risk. What can I afford to lose? But also what we often tend to do is we discount the cost of inaction. And we tend to kid ourselves that if I do nothing, if I stick with the status quo, things will sort themselves out. It'll just get better. It's why people just keep spending money that they can't afford, putting it on their credit card, rather than paying something off. They don't want to have that pain up front. But down the track, we end up in a worse situation. So I think it's always really important to know that there's also a risk associated with inaction.
Mhm. We are talking with best-selling author Margie Worrell, who wrote a book called Stop Playing Safe. She's been explaining to us the concept of fear and greed, which are what I see as a financial advisor, emotions that direct people from morning till night. It's so common that we have to deal with this. But I just want to clarify. I don't, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm understanding from you is that you're not telling people just to go out and be risky, but rather to assess the risk and make a decision based on the facts rather than simply letting their emotions guide them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to take, yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to assess the risks. But too often, my experience is that people actually don't take risks they need to take. It's not about taking stupid, reckless risks. It's about taking smart risks. But knowing that if you don't put something at risk, you're not going to be able to move forward. And, you know, when I talk about risk, I'm not just talking about financial risk. A lot of my work is around social and emotional risk. We don't want to risk our reputation. We don't want to risk our pride being hurt. We don't want to take on a great big role in case we fail at it and then we're humiliated. So there are different types of risks, and I think it's really important to distinguish that too.
So could you clarify what a risk taker looks like? One of the things that people often say, I think wrongly, is they say, oh, you're an entrepreneur, you're a big risk taker. And as an entrepreneur myself, I don't think that's the case, meaning I just think I'm very careful and I plan things out, and I don't throw money into something that would seem risky. I'm just very, very focused. But I think that people misinterpret that. So what is the sort of ideal or the paradigm of a risk taker look like to you?
Look, you know, and I think it's really important to be clear that, you know, everybody is, we all have different personalities, we all have different aspirations. And so what taking a risk could be for me might be very different to somebody else. And I think it's hard to say, look, a risk taker is, to label it as any sort of type of person. We think of Bear Grylls and, you know, the crazy risky things he does. People think of Richard Branson, you know, the trailblazing entrepreneur. But I think we all need to be risk takers. Even people who are quite cautious can still be risk takers. It's about being willing to put ourselves in a situation where we're vulnerable to losing something we value. And we can mitigate risk and we can manage all of the factors around it. But in the end, we have to put ourselves in a place where we are vulnerable to losing something we value, whether it's money, whether it's pride, whether it's our professional reputation, you know, you name it. It's putting something on the line that we value. And that's at the core of what a risk is.
Okay.
And so when it comes to making, whether it's an investment decision or a change of life decision, that there's possibility we could give something up and lose something that we value.
Okay, so help me out here, because as a financial advisor, I know on paper, let's say, what a reasonable investment strategy for a client might be. You know, I've done the research and we've done the financial plan, and let's say that it includes taking a fair amount of market risk, or, you know, volatility risk. And yet I see that the client is risk averse. So there's two issues. One is, should I be encouraging the clients to actually take the risk? And if yes, what's the best way to teach someone that it's okay to take these risks?
Yeah. You know, in the end, it's like, I mean, when it comes to money, it's like, how much can you afford to lose, or how much are you comfortable with losing if things don't work out? But I think that's where
people hate losing, by the way. When I ask that question, they always go, oh, Doug, I don't want to lose anything. I only want to make 10 to 15% a year with no risk of loss. You know, what am I going to say, you know?
Look, and if it was easy to take risks, everyone would be taking them, and obviously not everybody is. And, you know, some people are naturally more risky with money because some people are more comfortable with losing money than other people are for various different reasons. But I think being really clear here, okay, one, what's the probability that you might lose? Because often we don't assess that accurately. So really, let's look at this. What's the probability? There's always a probability, but are you overestimating that probability? Because often we overestimate the probability that we could lose something. Now, not everyone. Some people underestimate it, but that may well be the case for someone who's quite cautious. And two, if you don't invest, if you keep your money, you know, in your 2% interest bearing account in the bank, you know, are you comfortable with that outcome? Is that something you'll feel okay about if you do nothing? And, often helping people get present to, well, actually, no, I'm not okay with that. That can be enough to have people go, you know what, I am willing to put something at risk here. Maybe not the whole lot, maybe just a parcel of it. And, obviously then people diversify and use lots of different investment strategies. But I think just sort of looking at those two factors.
I think one of the areas, or the way that I try to describe it to people, is I say to the clients, listen, you and I have a different definition of risk. Your definition of risk is often volatility. The market goes up and down and you watch your portfolio change in value. But my definition of risk is that you will run out of money during your lifetime. If that happens, then you're really, really in trouble. And therefore, sometimes you need to take short-term risk in order to help you to be more confident that when you retire, you won't have to one day move in with your kids. And I think that speaks to a lot of people. The other thing that I've noticed with a lot of people is that those who are more charitable, a lot of my clients are based on religious edict or simply their personality, give away 10 to 20% of what they earn. And I've noticed that these people often are the richest people that I work with, and they seem to view money differently. And so my theory is simply that when you feel the money's not really yours, when in any case you're going to be giving away a lot, you get a different view of money. Have you found that as well?
Yeah, look, I mean, money is ultimately, you can look at it through lots of different lenses, energy, what is money? And I know for me, as I've got older, I've got much better. I shared with you before we started this interview how, I spent time in Israel when I was 22, staying in the cheapest possible accommodation I could find because I had no money. And I certainly didn't grow up with much money. And so I had to really shift my paradigms around money in my 20s and 30s. But when it comes to money, money itself gives you nothing. It's what you can buy with the money or trade with the money. And I know when we have a positive energy around money, when it's not about being flippant or foolish with money, but knowing that, if you purchase something, somebody else is benefiting. Now that guy that has the cafe, he just made $6 from you because you bought a coffee and a muffin or something. That it's not just about trying to keep as much money for yourself, because we know that there's a lot of very wealthy people who are really miserable people. And those who said that tithe a lot of money, I mean, really it is that mindset of giving, of abundance, of not being stuck in scarcity mode. And I'm sure those people are not foolish with money. They're generous with what they give it to. They're very intentional about it, but they have a real freedom around their finances and their wealth and their money.
Yeah, and I think that does lead to a much better or healthier attitude. We've been talking with Margie Worrell, who is the best-selling author of Stop Playing Safe, as well as having written other books. Margie, we are just about out of time. It's been fascinating talking with you. How can people learn more about the work that you're doing?
Oh, well, look, I send out a newsletter every month or so called Live Boldly, and people can sign up for that on my website, margieworrell.com. They can follow me on Twitter, Margie Worrell, or on Facebook, or connect on LinkedIn. Or just obviously feel free to grab a copy of either of my books, Stop Playing Safe, which came out this year with Wiley, or Find Your Courage, which I wrote a few years back with McGraw-Hill.
All right, we will put links to all of that on the show notes at goldsteinongelt.com. Margie, thanks so much for your time.
Oh, it's been great to talk to you, Doug. Take care.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.